Now let's look at the directives in both Angular and Next.js. So this directive concept is there in both these frameworks. So let's start with the Next.js. Okay, so the one that you are seeing on this particular page, use client, this is one of the directive, and there is one more directive called use server. So by default, Next.js components are server side rendered components. That means every component is going to be rendered on the server, and upon the request it will be sent to the client and displayed on the page. Okay, and where these server side components are going to be automatically pre-rendered on the server when we actually build the application, so that the performance of the application is going to be much faster instead of directly coming onto the browser and rendering onto the parsing and rendering onto the browser. So if you want to make any component in, if you don't mention this, okay, so by default it will become a server side component. So now if you add this use client, that means it is a client side component. So the client side component is on the build time. For the first time, this particular component is going to be rendered on the server only, but when it is rendered onto the browser, some subsequent request onwards, it will be rendered only on the browser. It won't make a connection to the server to render this particular page. Okay, so for server you can use use server. Okay, so these are the two attributes that these are the two directives that we have in Next.js. Okay, now let's go to Angular and write these directives. So in Angular point of view, there are three type of directives. So the first one is component. Okay, Angular, this is one of the important feature for Angular, and the two-way data binding feature working because of the directives only. Okay, so the first one is component based directive. So every component in Angular, if you see, it will be annotated with this particular directive, which is @component. So component, the directive in Angular point of view, it will enhance or it will add some additional feature to the existing HTML page or existing HTML components or existing HTML elements like div tag and p tag and all. So in Angular, even though this particular component also it will render some HTML onto the page, so for that reason, even the component also one type of a special directive in Angular. This is the first one, and there is a second one which is of a structural directive. So structural directives are like a ng for loop or ng if loop, and let me just show this. So in this page where we previously loaded these states on the page, right? So this particular ng for that you are seeing, this is one of the structural directive which will perform some action on the DOM and it will manipulate the DOM. So for that reason, ng for or @for is Angular 17 version type. Otherwise, previously we used to have ng for. Okay, so this one or ng if condition or @if condition. So all these are structural directives. Okay, and there is something one more thing that we already used in the login form. Okay, in this login form, okay, right now we used form control, but usually if you use ng, there is one more way to create the Angular form using ng model. So ng model also one more type of structural directive. Okay, so there is one, the third category is attribute directive. Okay, attribute directive in this code we have not used it yet. So let's create a directive, attribute directive, and use it in this particular app component.html, so that you will get to know what exactly is attribute directive. Okay, so to create a directive in Angular, again I'm using the command line ng generate directive and say directive name color. It will create two files. Okay, directive spec file and the directive file, it will make an entry of this directive into the app module. Okay, So now if you see the directive, this is a color directive. Okay, so this is the app color that we are going to use. Okay, now let me just add a p tag saying okay. So to use the directive, we have to use it like this without hash. If you add a hash, it will become id. So if you want to use the directive, this is how you have to mention in the HTML. This is what you need to do to use the directive. Okay, but to change this color on this particular text before rendering, we need to go to the, so when this particular app component is rendered onto the page, this particular p tag, since it is attached with the directive, it will go to directive.ts file. Okay, okay, now it is black color. Okay, now let's go to the directive. So within this directive, usually we get a specific element reference. So wherever it is used, okay, element meaning this particular reference, this p tag reference you will get here. Okay, within this particular constructor, you can get hold of the element and you can perform some action on top of this to provide the directive feature to it. Okay, so you need to get hold of the native element, and now let's change the color of this to red color when it is rendered. Okay, let's check. Now if you see, even though the color is not mentioned in the HTML, but because of this directive, before rendering this, it went to directive, got the element reference which is of p tag, this one. Okay, and it applied the style and the color. Okay, this is how you can apply the color. Okay, and you can not only this, you can perform many more activities on that particular element. Even if you want to, when you want to change something on the mouse over scenario. Okay, so the host listener that we need to get hold of, and on this mouse over event. Okay, on this particular mouse over, so what we can do is, okay, within this we can get hold of the element dot native element dot, we can, when the user mouse over on this, let's change the color to green. Expected identifier. Okay, oh, okay, it should be on mouse over. Okay, that function can be anything. Now if you see on the page load, it is red color. As soon as when I mouse over, it turned into green. Okay, because of this host listener in the directive. Okay, this is how you can use the directive in Angular. Okay, so that's all about these directives. So now let's look at state management in both Angular and Next.js. Okay, so in Angular there are two different ways that we can manage the state using inbuilt Angular framework feature called service, or we can even use a Redux. Okay, so let's start with the service, then we will look at the Redux. And the Next.js also there is a Redux process for state management. We'll look at it later. Okay. So to generate a service, again I'm using the command line. I'll say login service that I want to use. I want to push this complete login details into the service and hold the data and display in some other place. So now if you go here, there is a login service. Okay, let's start writing the service for state management. It is the most easiest way to write the state, to manage the state in Angular. So I'll say users of array, okay. Within this, set user, get a user of any, and this dot users dot push. This particular user should be pushed here. And get users method will add to get all the users. Okay, to use the service with state management in Angular, this is the most easiest way. When you set the data, it will be set to service, and when you get the data, you will get the data. Okay, now let's see how we can use it. To use this particular one, we have to first inject the service into the constructor of the component where exactly we wanted to use. Okay, so login service, I injected this into the constructor. So the second thing is, once I submit, okay, I want to set this particular user to the state service. Okay, and now since we are setting it here, again we'll try to get this users and display on the page. Now this dot users equal to get users will print this on the login page itself at the bottom. Add one more div here. Since this is an array, I'll go for a date for users of user track user. If it is empty, just say no users found. User of users. User, okay. Oh, this is for loop. Okay, here let's print these users. User dot username and a user dot password. Should be async, and display this only if there is a data in this. So this is the Angular 17 version, else say no records. Okay, now let's validate this. So let's go to login. So within this login, okay, now if you see, when I created this, okay, when I created this, it went to service, okay. When I click this submit, I post this to service array where you have a users, and along with that, at the same time, after in the next line, I'm getting all the users and I'm printing on the page. Since it is async, it will continuously update the latest to the page. Okay, this is how you can manage the state in Angular, okay, using service. Okay, now let's look at how we can manage the state with Redux in Angular. Okay, let's look at it. So to use the Redux, we have to go for NgRx. Okay, so this is the NgRx for Angular. Let's see the installation. Let's add this to the Angular project. Okay, so now the dependency is added. Okay, right now let me just get rid of this service piece. Okay, to use the Redux, as the first step, we have to, I'll create a user model, okay, with a username and password. It should be under app, within the app. So I'll create a user.model.ts. Okay, within this file, I'll create an interface for user with both the properties. And I wanted to export this to use it in other place. Okay, this is the first step. I need a user model. So the second step is, let's write the actual reducer, user.ts. Okay, within this reducer, I'll add a function called add user reducer. Okay, for this we'll get a state of user array plus the action so the action of, from the action we'll get the action type and the payload. Okay, let me add a switch case. Okay, within this switch, I'll add a case to add the user. So when I try to call this particular add user, I want to say state action dot payload, so it will add the record. Or the other way is default return the state. Okay, add user, let me just add a constant. Okay, okay, so this is how we can create the Redux to hold the data. Okay, so I need one more class. So within the app, so it will be to maintain the state close to the code. So I need to create an interface to maintain this particular state. Within this, I'll say read only users list of user type. Okay, that's all I need. Now the Redux setup is done. Okay, now let's use this in a login form. What we will do is when we actually click login with by entering username and password, we'll push that content to list of users in the Redux and get that and display. Okay, for that let me just inject the store into the constructor that we need that store. Okay, for now I'm just removing this login service as we are not using. So the store would be of the store of app state Okay, this is how we need to import. Once it is ready, imported, so this dot store dot dispatch, I'll dispatch this user data. Okay, and type of the action is the same thing, add user. Okay, and along with this I need to pass the payload. So the payload should be of type user. Within this I need to set the both username and password here, so that we can get it from the form. From that value dot username, and the same goes to the password. So when we submit the form, we'll dispatch this data, and at the same time we'll display this data. Once it is dispatched, we wanted to display, right? For that we'll use the same users equals to this dot store dot select the state and state dot users. So this is how we can get the data from the store. Okay, once we get this data, we can display this the same way. We already have this users to display as part of the service state management. We created this, so let's keep that as it is. Let's see whether it is working. Okay, I'll just enter user and password. Yeah, now if you see this content, the one that you are seeing, these users, okay, these users coming from the store, which is of a Redux store. Okay, how it is pushed to the Redux? When I submit, when I click login, okay, if you see login button and the function name is on submit. So when I submit, I'm getting the form data, form value, and dispatching this content to the store. Okay, and since it is this particular store is tied here, so every time when there is an update here, it will be attached to users, since it follows two-way data binding in Angular. So by default this content will be continuously updating because of this async. Okay, this is how the state management works in Angular. It is much more easy actually when you compare with Next.js state management. This is much easy. So let's write the same state management with Redux in Next.js and understand how it is different from Angular. So to use the Redux in Next.js, so the first step is we need a Redux toolkit and React Redux and React Persist. Okay, these are the dependent libraries that I already added. Okay, now let's focus on writing the Redux code. So as a first step, so within the src, I'll create a Redux folder. Within this Redux folder, I'll start by adding the model name. This is users. Okay, to hold the users, actually I need this interface, and within this we'll have a user state which will be of user array, and so the same we'll create a user object here, and within this we'll have a username of a string and a password of string. Okay, this is what we need as the initial step to hold the data. This is the model that we need. So along with this, within the same folder, within the Redux, I'm creating a store.ts. So this particular store, most of the Redux projects it will be same. So for that reason, instead of wasting time, I'll copy paste this. So I'm copy pasting this logic, this particular file. Okay, so this will be same across any Redux application. All we are doing is creating a reducer which is of a user reducer. We'll create that user reducer login slice. Okay, and remaining things are mostly same. This particular use app dispatch and app selector, this total code is same except the user reducer that we need to create. Okay, so let's create a login slice file within this Redux. So we'll create a folder called store, and within this I'll create a file called login slice. This is specific to login data that we are going to push to Redux. So within this, so we need to define the initial state of the users, which is users, and within this we need to say the user state. Users state as a initial state, as an initial record, it will have a username empty and password of empty. So this is the first step, and the next thing is we'll create a user slice. Okay, we need to use the create slice, which is of Redux function, and within this it will take, so whatever the content that we are pushing into this Redux, we need to give a name for this. So for that reason I'm giving a name called users, and we need to pass the initial state. Along with this we'll add the reducers. So okay, within the reducers we'll set the user's state. It will get a state, comma, the action which is of payload action, and this particular payload is of type user, and let me just import this. Okay, within this state dot users state, okay, user state dot push the current payload content. Okay, action dot payload, okay, what is this issue? Initial state, okay, spelling mistake. Now we have this user slice. Let's export these to use it. Okay, set users state, let's user slice dot actions. Unless we export it, we cannot use it in other files. So users reducer also, go for user slice dot the reducer. So this is how you can export, so that we can import this and use it. So this is the major slice that we need to create. Okay, we have a store and a global store. Right now we have a global store here, and the login slice, this is of specific to login. So if we have different type of objects, you need to create a slice each for each one. Okay, along with this there is one more important file, which is of the wrapper for all the all the complete application. So the wrapper would be, I'll use it as a React provider file. Okay, within this wrapper code also same across any sort of Redux application. Let's, for that reason I'll just copy paste this, copy pasting this. Okay, okay, this is how you should wrap this. Now let's use this particular Redux in the actual page.tsx to use it. Okay, let's go here. We need to wrap with, what was the name that we gave? Redux provider. This is how we should wrap. Now it is available, but now we need to write the logic to use it. Okay, let's see how it is rendered. Is it still working? Okay. Okay, let me add this. Oh, okay, it is use server. It should be use client. Okay, now the page is loaded properly. Now let's use this Redux in the login page. Okay, this is how you can set up the Redux. So this is almost looks similar to Angular project. Okay, Angular setup, but Angular is much more easy to set up. Here we need to make some additional we need to write some additional code in this, but Angular, it is mostly straightforward. So now let's go to the login page. Let me just push this to easily look at it. Okay, when we submit the form, instead of setting the form here, let's set this data to, let's dispatch this data to Redux. Okay, for that I need to first import use the I need to first define the app dispatch here. Okay, use app dispatch. Now I can dispatch this content. Okay, within this dispatch I need to call this set users state, and I can pass this particular content so that it will be dispatched to the red user. Okay, also now let's see whether it is working. So we are simply dispatching it, we are not getting back to show it. Okay, right now it is not visible. Okay, now let's get the data and display it. Okay, so for that reason I'll just create one more page called maybe a display or something, display.tsx. Within this I'll just get some basic let me just remove this, get rid of this. Okay, in this page let's get that content from the Redux and display, get the users, list of users. Okay, so for that, as the first step, there is nothing, it is simple. Constant user state, you can simply call the use app selector, and within this it is same logic as Angular. This is almost same. State dot users dot user state. So this is the simplest thing. It will get the data. Now we can display it on the HTML. So here, so since the data is here, I'll use this user state dot length. If this length is greater than 1, then only I want to display. Okay, I'll just display it in h1 with a, so again here user state dot map of user. So I'll get each user here. Once I get the user, it should be this. Okay, once I get the user, I'll just display it. Here, so the user dot username, user dot password. Okay, this is how you can get the data from the Redux and display it on the page. Let's see whether it is working. So right now, okay, oh okay, now it is not working because we didn't included this in the main page yet to display. Here, along with login, let's add this display. Now it should display. Okay, now let me add let me just remove this content that is displaying on the right side. This content. So I'll remove this. Okay, now when I click login, now if you see, this content came from Redux, and when I click login, we pushed this data to Redux. Okay, now let's understand how it is. Within this login page, okay, when I click submit login, there is a on submit. Here I am dispatching this form data, which is of username and password, okay, to the Redux, and in the display page I am getting that same user state and simply displaying it. Okay, now if I click it, it will go on. Same thing with Angular also. So if I say, okay, it is continuously persisting. Okay, let's compare these two code, Angular and Next.js, and understand. So now let's look at this. So in the Angular, we clicked submit. On submit, we are dispatching and sharing what is the type and the payload. When we here, we are directly same thing, we are doing the same thing, but we don't have any specific action. We didn't define actions in the Next.js Redux, so that's why directly setting this data. This is how we can dispatch. It is almost same. Okay, now in the display, and let's go to, we are displaying here itself. For that, in Angular, let's copy this, how we are getting, and put it in the Angular file and compare and see what exactly is different. Okay, now this is Angular code to get the data from the store. This is Next.js code to get the data from the store. Overall, if you see, you are getting hold of the store, okay, and getting the state and the users. Here we have and within the users we set user state. That's why we are getting it like this. Otherwise, it is same. Okay. So overall, in Angular and Next.js, the Redux state management is almost similar. So for the reason why I made this particular YouTube video is to comparing both Angular and Next.js code is both are same. So there is no point of learning them separately. Instead, in this video, you can learn side by side those so that you can understand the differences, and at a time you can learn both the frameworks. Okay, thank you. I hope you enjoyed this content. See you in the next video.